Major climate news this week. Leaked documents have revealed that some of the world's most polluting countries are attempting to water down a landmark United Nations climate report. The summit hosted by Britain has been described as the world's last best chance to prevent global warming from reaching dangerous levels. I'm referring then to the climate conference, the COP conference that's due to be held in Glasgow in the next few weeks. Now, a flurry of new commitments are expected from governments and businesses in order to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Greenpeace Africa's climate and energy campaigner, Nhlanhla Sibisi, is joining us to talk more about expectations for Glasgow in November, as well as that leak of the submissions or inputs made by the countries such as Saudi Arabia and Australia and Nhlanhla this week. First things first, let's begin with the leak itself. Your reading of this, was this just the regular input of nations during climate conversations, or very much a deliberate attempt to skew the outcomes of the report?
You can see it in both ways, Thembekile. The first is that governments are allowed to make inputs in terms of suggestions, but those suggestions actually need to be backed up by the science that the scientists that are putting together the IPCC report before they can accept them, and they are not actually compelled to accept them unless they are based on the science. But however, the other side of the story is that what we see is that there's a deliberate attempt by governments, as you alluded in your introduction. Some governments that are deliberately making an effort to make it a point that they water down this scientific research, and that's quite worrying because this is a science-based research which is compiled by scientists that have done a lot of peer reviewing before even coming to any conclusion. And by the way, the report is not yet finalized, and we are yet to see what will be the final outcome of it.
And the final report, as I understand it, is due out in February next year. But how intense is geopolitical jostling for influence and power over the world's future climate policy?
It's very much intense if we look at it from the point of view that there are countries that are hell-bent on continuing using fossil fuels, and there are vested interests behind those attempts, and those vested interests unfortunately have over decades, by the way, if I may say that, have crept over decades into the thinking, the different types of thinkings that the governments have actually applied. And just to add to that, Thembekile, is that this is a report which is actually convened by the UN, which the very same countries have actually agreed to this science-based report that need to be compiled. So, however, because of what they are seeing, because they have the behind the scenes look at what the report is actually proposing and suggesting based on science, and they trying to actually use, and these are the vested interests that are trying to use the government influence to try and see how they can change or water down this report as it has been reported.
So, Nhlanhla, why would countries want to have such influence on the outcomes of this report, given that when it does come out in February, it's not going to make recommendations or issue instructions to countries on what to do as far as climate policy? It is merely a research guide, if you will, or research resource.
First of all, we need to understand that what the report impact would have in terms of not influence, but what direction it could possibly provide for governments to formulate their policies. And if you look behind that, you would see that the vested interests, as I referred to earlier on, which is mainly businesses that are in the fossil fuel industry, want to use the opportunity to actually get the governments to rally behind them and actually make to influence the outcome of what the report should be. And yes, you are absolutely correct, because the scientists that are actually compiling these reports, they have an obligation not to accept recommendations as long as they are not science-based. But however, these governments are hoping, and we hope that they fail, but they are hoping that actually that they could make a difference because of these very vested interests that we are seeing. And the unfortunate part is that it seems like we are prioritizing profits over the catastrophe that we're already facing and that we need to to avert.
Let's talk about Glasgow then, because that'll happen before this climate report is out by the Intergovernmental Panel. It is in a few weeks, in November. Do you expect anything significant, any major shifts as far as climate policy based on that? Because the last time it was held, I think, in South Africa, about a decade ago, in fact, it took hours for it to even come out with a report, if I recall correctly.
Usually these negotiations are quite complex because, as we would imagine, that different countries have to jostle for for different positions, but also to put across their own national interests first. And when we're talking about the climate crisis, unfortunately, we can't be looking at national interests. And what Glasgow we are hoping that will bring, and mainly it's about the nationally determined commitments that have been made as agreed at the Paris Agreement that should actually be put forward at Glasgow. So that is what we're actually looking forward to, as opposed to the influences that is being put on the IPCC report that we've been talking about. But above that, what we need to say is that what we are expecting from COP is that countries should show a little bit more ambitious targets in terms of reducing their emissions or their greenhouse gases, and showing a little bit more commitment in terms of supporting countries, especially countries that are in the global south that need financial support, because this is part of the Paris Agreement's issues that were tabled and agreed on by the countries that were represented there. So we need to see a combination of approaches that that's actually put on the table and agreed on for us to move forward. Because as the previous reports have reported, we're actually now on a code red, and that simply means, and this was re-emphasized by the UN Secretary General Guterres, when he was saying that we're on code red, which simply means that countries need to be a little bit more ambitious. They need to really commit to reducing the use of fossil fuels so that we can reduce our carbon emissions and avert this climate crisis in which we're already in.
Nhlanhla Sibisi, climate campaigner at Greenpeace Africa. Good to have your thoughts tonight, so thank you.
Thank you, Thembekile.